in Ecclesiastes, for example, which was most likely written by a non-believer. I've gone through a verse-by-verse kind of deconstruction of the Sermon on the Mount that's available at the Iron Chariots wiki, wiki.ironchariots.org, that goes verse by verse to show that this supposed greatest sermon ever given that demonstrates wisdom beyond any that man could ever comprehend is actually a little bit of good advice and a bunch of bad advice and some rather ignorant comments. And so it's frustrating for me, and in particular, when I see somebody like Dawkins go ahead and say, well, yes, of course you have the Sermon on the Mount, which is, this great sermon. No, it's not. It is not. People have been duped into believing that, okay, well, this Jesus guy said all these great things, but the doctrine around this is just kind of, nasty. No, Jesus said some rather particularly stupid things as reported in the Bible. There are, and I'm not going to go into them now. You can go to wiki.ironchariots.org and find that thing. So, yeah, you're going to find a mix of things in the Bible, just like you would find a mix of things in any number of books that have been collected together to demonstrate a doctrine from disparate authors.
Right. These first few chapters that I've been reading, and the book is pretty big, as you know, I've found things that have had inherently good meanings. I just passed, I think it was in Deuteronomy, I just passed the Ten Commandments. And there's like, love your father and mother. Okay, that's fine. But as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that God, as many religions and many people describe him, because you have to describe what are you talking about when you say God. I know you've mentioned that before.
Sure.
Have mostly stated that he's all-loving and all-knowing, etc. Well, right now, 90% of what I'm reading in the Bible, it may not be all bad, but it's sure a lot of it. So how does that explain?
You should probably go talk to some Christian apologists, but I can tell you that a lot of them are going to talk about God being infinitely just. And so the things that, first of all, you look at and see as immoral, you are just simply wrong because you are an immoral being, and who are you to judge God? And that God has a grander understanding of justice. And so when he orders the Israelites to go in and slaughter an entire nation, this is from a moral action that, though we evidently can't understand it, God knows so much more about morality than us that it is in fact moral. And I say bullshit on two levels. First of all, it's absurd to make claims that things like that are moral. And second of all, as I pointed out before, it is necessarily immoral to hold someone accountable for a moral concept that is beyond their comprehension. So if in fact there was a God who had a better understanding of morality than we did, it would be immoral for him to hold us to his standards if they're beyond our comprehension. You can only be held responsible for the things that you actually comprehend, which is why most states tend to not have a death penalty for those who are mentally handicapped. It is why all parents do not punish their children in the same way that you would punish a teenager or punish an adult for the same infractions. It's because we understand that there must necessarily be a sufficient degree of comprehension of one's wrong, culpability, wrongness, whatever. So the answers you get from apologists, it's double talk. It is, well, God is, so mysterious and he knows so much more than us that, I realize some of these things are difficult for you to understand how God could do this, but he's God. Okay, so what?
And I don't understand how somebody, and I'm still struggling with this is why I'm calling. I don't understand all the things I'm reading, how somebody like that could really seriously believe themselves. I'm having a hard time. I was on the fence for a while, and I still am in a sense because I have this somewhat, you described this in a few shows, this fear of going to hell and stuff, which I haven't read in the Bible yet. I haven't gotten to that part for some reason. But it's just, it feels like a really scary story, and that's it. Unless I'm wrong.
In some aspects, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, and I don't have an answer for how, people necessarily buy into this. I know that there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of logical errors. Daryl's talked about the protective mechanisms that go into the God virus. I don't know if you want to kind of address that real quick, but it circumvents reasoning.
Yeah. Once the God virus has gotten in your head, it really doesn't matter what evidence is presented to you. It's almost impossible to see it. Remember, every argument you just heard Matt say could have been said about a Muslim defending their religion as well, or a Hindu or a Buddhist, any number of religions, they all use exactly the same arguments. So keep that in mind as you're reading through the Bible. You realize, okay, this is a pretty scary story, but then go read the Quran. It's a pretty scary story too. And read Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. It's a pretty scary story. They're all scary, and they justify this incredible amount of genocide and misogynation and all sorts of what I would call immoral behavior, because this God is ultimately just and knows far more than we do. So.
And on that note, Eric, I guess I'll send you back to keep reading a bit, because we don't really have the answer that you're looking for. So finish reading it, I don't know, do a book report and get back with us.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Whoops, I might have hit the wrong button there. We got Andrew here in Austin.
Hi, did you read Matthew 5:27 and 28?
Sure, I've read the whole Bible several times.
Okay, do you know what it says there?
Is that the passage about adultery, where it's doesn't just have to be physical adultery? If you look at another man's wife with lust, you've committed adultery in your heart?
Exactly. It says, "Whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart."
Sure.
How do you not think that that's a good thing for people to have limits?
You think that's a good thing?
It's called mind control. You're trying to determine what I think and what I don't think. That's one of the stupidest things I could imagine. How can you control or even pretend to control what somebody thinks? And you don't think Jesus looked on a woman without lust? Or any of his disciples?
That's what Jesus said. That is Jesus, what Jesus said right there.
Well, yeah. First of all, we'll set aside how you think you know that this is what Jesus said. Second aside, we'll set aside whether or not it matters whether Jesus said it. I don't care who said it. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And so if somebody says, now I will say, if a man looks on a woman lustfully, he's committed adultery in his heart, is absolutely wrong. Because first of all, he's not necessarily married, and adultery is specifically a lustful or sexual action that extends beyond the bounds of marriage. So as a single person looking on a woman lustfully isn't adultery. And by the way, I put it to you that almost nobody on the planet outside of arranged marriages would have ever gotten married or had sex if they hadn't looked at someone of the opposite sex lustfully. And finally, why is it a man looking at a woman lustfully? Why isn't it a woman looking at a man lustfully, or a man looking at a man, or a woman looking at a woman? This is a misogynist. Hang on.
If you see a beautiful woman, do you just go rape her right away?
Andrew, I'm going to let me finish the thought. It's a misogynistic bit of language that is patently absurd. It denies something that is trivial about human nature and the way things actually work, and tries to compound it as sin. Okay? I could care less if somebody wants to call it sin. Now, go ahead.
Well, don't you think it's important to have limits on your sexual desires? Otherwise, everyone would just be raping everyone.
Really? You think people would just run around raping people?
Well, did you just rape someone?
I haven't raped anybody in the last 50-some years.
Yeah, I've never raped anybody, nor have I had the inclination to.
I've been an atheist for 20 years, so it's just amazing.
So you know that's you do.
How do you get from it's probably a good thing if people don't run around raping each other to therefore this statement about lustful thoughts is necessarily morally correct? Please make the connection between those two. How do you get from we should have some limits to what we can do to we need to have thought crime legislation? How do you get there?
What limits do atheists have?
Well, what culture? Tell me one culture that doesn't have limits. And every culture on the face of the earth has limits, and they're not Christian cultures. Chinese culture has got limits. Japanese, the most secular country in the world is Japan. They have the lowest rape rate. Denmark, Sweden, very unreligious places, and they don't have any rape problem. We have much more rape in the United States
than they
ever do in Denmark or Sweden.
Religion doesn't seem to be any kind of deterrent to rape. Are you implying that all rapists are non-Christians or non-religious? What about the priests who are raping little boys and little girls?
I just got back from...
Where do you get your limits from?
I get my limits from a rational consideration of the consequences of my actions. That's how I determine what's moral. I get it from a foundation that says my actions have an effect on those people around me and theirs have an effect on me. And that if we're going to live cooperatively and share space, we have to recognize that impact. And my freedom to swing my arm ends at their nose. And that I have no right to impose my will over somebody else's will in that type of scenario. That's where I get them from. It's from an understanding.
What's the punishment if you do that then?
I get them
You're just going to die.
Andrew, I get them from an understanding of reality, not an assertion of authority. Now, what was the question?
Well, if you just do all that, let's just say you go out with a gun and you just rape a bunch of people, then you just shoot yourself, what's going to be the punishment for you?
If I go out and rape a bunch of people and shoot myself, what's going to be the punishment for me? I'll be dead.
Yeah.
I'll be dead.
And why?
It's
do you
not
have...
going to hurt. The bullet's going to go through your head in about a second. There isn't going to be any pain.
That's correct. I'll be dead. Okay, so let's flip the script here. Let's say somebody goes around and rapes and murders somebody, and then after they're done, they get saved. What's the punishment for them?
Oh, the punishment is hell.
No, they got saved.
They got saved.
Are you saying that a rapist can't be saved? See, this is the problem. This is the problem with Christian religion. It establishes unrealistic and irrational and immoral criteria by which to live. And then it creates a loophole so that you don't ever have to be responsible for those actions. No, Andrew, shut up till I'm done. Christianity is not a moral system. It is an immoral system because it specifically says that there aren't necessarily consequences that you're going to have to pay because of a loophole. And what is the loophole? It has nothing to do with how good you are or how morally you act or anything else. It has to do with whether or not you're willing to be a sycophant to an idea. And if you are, then there is now an exception for which you no longer have to suffer a penalty for this. So the idea that secular morality offers no guarantee that people will ever pay for their crimes and their atrocities is not an argument against secular morality, because that is a tenet of Christianity. It is the foundation. The idea that the Christian God is just is directly contradicted by the idea that the Christian God is merciful. Perfect justice and any mercy are necessarily directly in contradiction, because mercy is a suspension of justice. So do not pretend that your religion is moral and just and then try to attack my position, which is based on reality, because somebody might rape people, shoot themselves ahead, and then not get punished. That's asinine.
If religion is such a bad thing, how come you think, I don't know how many atheists are there in the United States? How come everyone isn't just an atheist then?
Because not everybody is aware of how bad and untrue religion is, which is one of the reasons why
you
we're
think
doing
you're some kind of genius or something? That
Actually, yeah, but why is that relevant?
And everyone else is too dumb to figure it out?
No, it's not a matter of too dumb. You see, I was a Christian for 25 plus years.
Let me ask you a question. Why are you calling in as a Christian? Why didn't you call in as a Muslim, a Buddhist, or a Hindu?
Because my parents raised me as a Christian.
So you didn't have a choice, did you? When did you choose to be a Christian?
Well, it's just a tradition. Your parents teach you whatever religion they do. So if you were born over
so if you were
in
born
Afghanistan,
a Muslim,
you'd be a Muslim.
Yeah.
So if you were born a Muslim.
So it has nothing to do with truth then. It's just the way you were raised. See, because on this show we actually care about whether or not things are true. And my genius status is completely irrelevant because I was a Christian for 25 plus years. I did not get smarter when I became an atheist. What happened was I gained more information. I became more knowledgeable about subjects. And I decided to actually care whether or not my beliefs were true. You don't seem to care whether or not your beliefs are true. You just like them.
Because you were born here.
Well, I think it's good. I think you're going to have more happiness in your life if you have limits to tell you what you can do or...
how is that relevant to the truth of your religion? I've already said...
It's not all true. I know. I was talking to people on the chat here, and they said, well, they're read the Old Testament. There's all this genocide and stuff, and I was just saying, well, you don't have to read the whole thing because you just read, for example, what Jesus said.
Okay.
You don't.
So So are you saying, I tell you what, we already talked about this earlier, not everything that Jesus said is true or good or smart or wise either. So why would you care at all what any of them have to say? You're not concerned about truth. You've already just said you can pick and choose and toss aside the things you don't like. So you're inventing your own